We call it
Expedition Truth.
and we know you're gonna love it. You ready now?
Somewhere, among the many competing voices in the world, truth is just waiting to be discovered. So sit back, open your mind to a world beyond your imagination. A world where truth never fears questions. Welcome to Expedition Truth with your host, Jack Ashcraft.
Well, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you happen to be. Welcome to the program. Glad you tuned in tonight, whether you're listening live or you're listening on YouTube. I appreciate you taking the time to listen. Could have done anything, but you chose to be here, and I sincerely appreciate it. I want to give a special shout out to my YouTube subscribers. We've had a lot of new people subscribe this month, quite a few, and it's been surprising growth. And I want to thank everybody for that. Thank them for subscribing, for listening, for sharing, and for entering into discussion on the various topics there on the YouTube channel. Really appreciate it. We're trying to grow that, and every little bit helps. So I really appreciate it. Tonight's topic is a bit sensitive, and well, it's controversial in light of recent socio-political climate here. You know, one of the things that we're hearing a lot about is gender, and how, I mean, according to some lists, there are hundreds of genders. I've even seen lists of up to 200 and 300. Some people claim gender doesn't even exist at all. And, you know, parsing that for some, not for me, but for some, can be quite confusing. I hold to a very traditional viewpoint, one that I think is in line with biological science, that there are only two genders, male and female, period. And sacred scripture says that that's how God created us as well, male and female. But, you know, the roots of this this gender issue that has arisen just in the past few years, really, is something that's elusive. Now, we could chalk it up easily to, you know, neo-Marxist social ideology. And of course, there is truth to that. I mean, it is very much a part of that. But there seems to be something deeper to it that goes back much further than that. And my guest tonight, he's a returning guest. He is a longtime researcher and lecturer on issues pertaining to worldview philosophies and world religions. He's authored a number of books, and as well as articles on his own website. He's been published in apologetics journals, and he's been interviewed many times on radio and podcasts, etc. And if I recall correctly, he even has his own YouTube channel. His name is Ken Ahmed. Ken, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me. And before we get started, happy early wedding anniversary to you.
Oh, I can't believe you actually remembered that. That's pretty good.
I think I remember mostly because mine comes right after yours.
Gotcha. Well, thanks, Ken. That's very kind of you.
You're very welcome.
I wanted to have you on because you have a book that I thought was, just the title of it was intriguing. The Occult Roots of Postgenderism.
Yes.
And I thought that was a fascinating title. And I admit that I haven't read it, but that's why I wanted to have you on to discuss the contents of that book and how it pertains to current issues here. Let's first define our terms. What do you mean by postgenderism?
Well, for one, it's titled The Occult Roots of Postgenderism and a History of Changes to Psychiatry and Psychology. So it's kind of like a double whammy of situations happening here. So I actually did not coin the term postgenderism, but it came from a title of a paper written by George Drovsky and James Hughes, titled Postgenderism Beyond the Gender Binary. And they wrote that for the IEET monograph series. It's the Institute of Ethics and Emerging Technologies. And what's interesting is that somebody once reached out to me because they too had encountered the term postgenderism. It's still a very obscure term, but that's basically the way we're headed, right? You mentioned how many new genders there are, and you can just make up some right now on the spot if you want. So where does that lead you? Ultimately, it's to postgenderism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would have to agree. I think that the addition, the invention of hundreds of, quote, genders is really designed to move society past any concept of biological gender into a very subjective approach to that. But why would you think they would want to do that?
Well, one thing about this issue. So the first time I lectured on transhumanism, it was to a group that consisted of people in their 60s and 70s and 80s. And I thought, how on earth am I going to breach such a high-tech topic such as transhumanism with this group? Right. I was thinking homiletically, of course. And so I started by talking about gender issues. And I talked about how if you look at something as parochial as North America in the 60s, you basically had the breakdown of the open and celebrated breakdown of traditional family values and roles. So easy divorce, abortion, which is part of destroying the family, and along with a basic destruction of the concept of marriage, came an acceptance of homosexuality, which in turn eventually opened the door for all that has come thereafter, the whole LGBTQIAP plus movements, plural. And so one thing I noticed is, well, if you go from the 60s till same-sex marriage was legalized, that's quite a stretch of decades, right? But then the nanosecond same-sex marriage was legalized, everything else just arose from underground where it had been simmering, to the point where now it's a full frontal attack on reality itself, so that reality is whatever you emotively, subjectively self-proclaim that it is, even if it's contradistinct to verifiable three-dimensional reality. That's irrelevant anymore. It's not really, because our culture is drowning in self-contradiction, because it's obviously trying to adhere to something that's not true. But so it made me recognize that this issue of gender is incredibly complicated and multifaceted, so that it's more like, I think of it as the art of war, where the art of war would tell you that war doesn't just take place on a battlefield between two armies. It's philosophical, it's socio-political, it's economic, it's in the arts, in politics, in media, it's everywhere, in every possible way you could imagine. So that we have a generation coming up today that is being absolutely bombarded from every conceivable angle to accept this sort of worldview that has them denying any concept of rationality or logic based on what is ultimately true, to the point that nowadays the most current thing is basically, if you're claiming that we should be adhering to verifiable truth, that's now not just wrong, it's racist.
Oh, yeah. Just this week, I saw a post on Twitter, and the person said that transgender women are real women, as in biological women. And, I'm sorry, that is just not true. And interestingly, one conservative transgender personality, I don't know if you're familiar with Blair White or not, but well known in conservative circles for taking a conservative viewpoint on a lot of issues. But Blair White states very clearly that that they are biologically male and always will be, even though they present as female. So there's a bit of honesty there, but Blair is in the minority on that. Why the insistence, do you think, on assigning transgender people, claiming that they are biologically the gender they present as, when that's just simply not reality?
Okay, but our problem is that our worldview tells us that reality is not accidental, but reality was created. Mm-hmm. And so we would expect adherence to it as a universal imperative, but such is not the case when you step out of our worldview. Now, in a way it is, because other worldviews inevitably end up begging, borrowing, and stealing from our worldview, but that's something that needs to really be pointed out to them. So say, for example, you grow up being indoctrinated into evolution for at least a dozen years. Okay, so then the idea would be that the reason that we have a gender binary is purely arbitrary. It was not created, it was not designed, it was not meant to be. It's just an accidental byproduct of the evolutionary process, okay? So now if that's the case, then why should I adhere to one or the other gender? And this is one of the oddities that's happening in our culture, is when some men want to be referred to as women, some women want to be referred to as men, they're still locked into the gender binary when they're doing that. So that's the concept. This is where the concept of postgenderism comes in, is to just to totally explode that. Why should I be forced to choose between one and the other when they're both arbitrary? What if I want a third way, or a fourth, or a 500th, right? That's what's happening.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that they've, first of all, rejected the objective nature of truth, and everything proceeds from there, correct?
Right. The way I would put it is, in our frenzied rebellion against God, we have attacked reality itself. Now we're claiming that the universe is actually just an illusion, right? I mean, that's actually been on the table for centuries, that it's all Maya, it's all an illusion, a delusion. Now we're just speaking of it in high-tech terms. We're calling it a digital simulation. So then now we're attacking mathematics. Now we're attacking philosophy. We're attacking logic. And in our frenzied rebellion, we're to the point where we are deconstructing ourselves. We're deconstructing our bodies. That's how the fever pitch has reached the point where people living in first world countries who are highly educated are thinking it's perfectly acceptable for a mere child who is not old enough to vote, not old enough to drive, not old enough to drink alcohol legally, can nevertheless decide, with the encouragement of their parents usually, to take a regimen of hardcore pharmaceuticals that will fundamentally change who they are, biologically, emotionally, spiritually, for the rest of their lives. And we're thinking that's what makes sense.
You know, it's interesting too. There was a community on Reddit of people that are called detransitioners. I don't know if you're familiar with that. These are people who were transitioning.
It would sound like they.
Yeah, they were transitioning from their biological gender to the opposite, and at some point in the process decided that this was a mistake, and so they're detransitioning. And Reddit deleted the group, calling it hateful. And it was a support group for people who were detransitioning, and for people who had questions about that transition process. And some of the members of that group have YouTube channels, and I've watched some of their videos explaining their journey, and it's both men and women who have detransitioned, and in some cases, their lives have been irreparably damaged. In voices, genitalia, breasts, relationships with families and friends, etc. Now, I'm not justifying the families and friends cutting them off. I don't think that's right.
No.
But the biological damage, the damage done to the body, is very real. And there seems to be this militant transgender lobby out there who doesn't want those voices heard. What is the threat, do you think, to their agenda from people who have changed their minds? I mean, how could that possibly be a threat?
So for starters, it is most common that children who do experience body dysmorphia and all sorts of issues that cause them to question their own gender, that it is just a temporary thing for them, and they eventually grow out of it. So the purposeful thing that is being done is to lock them in. So if you leave a child to their own, as confused as they might be, or as much as they be struggling with it, they will most likely just come out of it by themselves. They'll grow out of it. So they're being a force to lock in. Now, let me read a quotation from the paper I mentioned, Postgenderism Beyond the Gender Binary, that will, I think, hit a lot of this stuff on the head. Although, as soon as I said that, I realized we're being told a break is coming up. So maybe I'll just save that. So eventually we can talk about the occult angle for a moment, but then also the psychiatric and psychological one, because what's going on in the psychiatric and psychological literature is that they are very openly admitting that the reason that they have changed their diagnoses and treatments is not because of science. It is because of socio-political activism. They're very open about that.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned there's an occult connection, and I want to dive into that, but can you give us a brief introduction to it? Because we got about 3 minutes here before break. Can you give us a brief introduction to how you determine that there's an occult connection?
Yeah, it's pretty simple. I read a bunch of occult literature, and occult literature from ancient times to modern times is absolutely saturated with references to androgyny and being a hermaphrodite. So their view is that the true God is not one gender or the other one, but is a combination of two, because they view that as being perfect unity. And so they claim that the original human was also dual gendered, because they would view that as a perfect creation from a perfect dual gendered God. And so they view the gender distinctions as being disunity. So that it is not just about what we would think of as coming together to become one flesh, and the husband and wife coming together and then having children. But they view that the ultimate outworking, the great work of occultism, would be to bring the genders back together in one person, mm-hmm. right, in each individual.
Mm-hmm.
So occult literature, grimoires, magical texts, they're saturated with that stuff. Absolutely. I could read you a bunch of quotations when we come back.
It sounds like biological alchemy.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That's exactly what it is.
I mean, it's a very strange form of occultism. And I'm familiar with most forms of occultism, but this one, you've caught me off guard with this one, Ken.
Yes, I would call it an alchemical wedding.
Okay, so that is one definition of that term then, the union of the genders?
Well, because you always hear in occultism about a chemical wedding.
Right.
So this would be more alchemical because it's mysticism in a way. Yeah. It's a fundamental transformation of the self.
Gotcha. All right. When we come back, we'll talk with Ken Ami more about the occult roots of postgenderism.
You're listening to Expedition Truth with Jack Ashcraft.
It's just good, clean fun.
Intelligent talk for the discerning mind. Share your thoughts of the show by calling 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Find us worldwide on Skype at KCOR Radio or jump into our live chat room at www.kcorradio.com.
Now the world will begin hearing us.
More truth than humanly possible after these brief words from our sponsors.
Are you ready? Ready to reach beyond the limitations of your mind? Then tune in live Friday nights at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern for Serious Talk Radio. Hosted by author, international clairvoyant, and Earth Mysteries investigator Betsy Lewis. From the possible to the impossible in the world of the supernatural, her array of world-renowned guests will leave you breathless while you ride this 1-hour cosmic wave of knowledge. Serious Talk Radio. Live Friday night at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. Exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. Come expand your mind and senses with Serious Talk Radio. Hosted by Betsy Lewis. A deeper understanding of the cosmos is but a show away.
You love them enough to do anything for them.
Mom, I need to be wiped.
Coming.
Including checking nhtsa.gov/the right seat to make sure they're in the right car seat. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
They say that the truth is stranger than fiction. What if they are one and the same?
It's a life form, unlike anything we know, not cellular but electrical in nature, extremely intelligent.
Join Dave Emmons, host of The Strange Truth, every Thursday night at 8 p.m. Pacific, 11 p.m. Eastern, as he connects the dots that others miss. The Strange Truth is a groundbreaking 2-hour talk show that interviews the hottest UFO experts, experiencers, whistleblowers, and spiritual masters from around the world.
A tool for people to connect with the universe and begin to understand it.
The Strange Truth.
It digs deep into current events, the extraterrestrial contact phenomenon, explores suppressed history, and dissects false flag conspiracy, all while expanding your spiritual ascendance.
What was that name again?
The Strange Truth, hosted by Dave Emmons, live every Thursday night at 8 p.m. Pacific, 11 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. Come get tomorrow's news today.
Immerse yourself in an epic journey through time where ancient mysteries unfold within a story of love and betrayal, as well as a battle of good versus evil in The Emissary Book 1. The reader's favorite Gold Medal Award winner for Visionary Fiction 2019, the action and adventure of The Emissary continues in The Emerald Tablet, Book 2. The 2019's Bronze Medal Award winner, The Emissary and The Emerald Tablet by Tamara Veach and Rennie DeFazio are both available now on Amazon.com. Let your reading adventure begin.
Welcome back to Expedition Truth. Expedition Truth.
This place is incredible.
Intelligent talk for the discerning mind. To be on the show live, call 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230.
What are you waiting for?
Worldwide callers, use Skype name KCOR Radio. Share your thoughts of the show on Twitter at KCOR Radio using hashtag KCOR. Even better, join like-minded individuals in our live chat room at KCORradio.com. Now, back to Expedition Truth with Jack Ashcraft, where the truth never fears questions.
Welcome back to the program. If you just joined us, we're talking with Ken O'Mee about the occult roots of postgenderism. Before we get back into the topic, I want to get a little housekeeping out of the way. If you like this program and you would like to help keep it on the air, it does cost money. Nothing's free, as we all know. We would appreciate you prayerfully considering becoming a patron. If you're listening on YouTube, if you look down in the description of this video, you'll find a link to our Patreon where you can become a patron of this program, starting for as little as $1 a month, really. And every dollar counts, and it helps keep us on the air. If you can't afford to make a monthly commitment like that, I understand that. I mean, things are difficult right now. Then we would ask that you pray for us. We need prayers every bit as much, even more than we need the cash. So if you could really commit to praying for this program, we'd appreciate it. If you'd like to give a one-time gift to keep this program on the air, you can do that at the kcorradio.com website. If you go there, you'll see at the bottom of the page there's a donation link. You just mark your donation for Expedition Truth. They'll make sure it gets credited to our account, and you can help in that way as well. If you're listening on YouTube, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Engage in the conversations as well. I try to make sure I answer everybody who gets involved in the conversations about our topics, and so that would be great if you join in that way. All right, let's get back into the conversation here with Ken. Ken, we were talking about the occult roots of this postgenderism ideology, and we discussed just briefly the alchemical origin of that. You said you had some proof texts, some quotes that you could provide that would back that up.
Yes, and in fact, most of my book is just quotations and then my commentary on them. So to begin with, just think of something as basic as Eliphas Levi's illustration known as Baphomet. Mm-hmm. Okay, the horned deity, the horned anthropomorphic personage. There you go. There's a post-gender type of combination right there, because it's got the bazoombas and it's got a schmeckle. I mean, it's got it all.
Right.
So here's a couple quick quotation one-liners. The tradition that mankind was anciently hermaphrodite is world old. That's from 1918. Magus Incognito writing in The Secret Doctrine of the Rosicrucians. Another person, Hargrave Jennings, writing in the Rosicrucians, Their Rites and Mysteries, 1870, referring to a person who held that at the end of the world, both sexes should be reunited in the same person. Manly P. Hall, The Secret Teaching of All Ages, 1928. That man was primarily androgynous is quite universally conceded, and is the reasonable presumption that he will ultimately regain his bisexual state.
I want to note also that Manly P. Hall was a Freemasonic philosopher.
Indeed, the premier one. Edward Carpenter in Intermediate Types Among Primitive Folks, 1914. It is evident that the conception of a double sex, or of a sex combining the characters of male and female, haunted the minds of the early peoples. I could read quotes all day. That's how they are. And note, by the way, that these are from the 1800s and early 1900s. I mean, this stuff has been around forever.
Mm-hmm. So in your research, did you find like specific rituals involving an attempt to somehow transform the human body like this, or no?
That I didn't really notice, like a guide, like a how-to guide. Uh-huh. So it's almost like they're just expecting that it's a form of evolution that would begin as a ritual. So that it is, okay, so the bottom line of magic, and now I'm talking magic with a K, would be that it is the imposition of will towards causing change in the real world, so that these whatever ritual you would undergo when you set your mind towards becoming post-gender or dual gender, however you want to think about it, would ultimately result in that happening to you, even though, I mean, obviously it might not happen outwardly, but we're already ending up, right, in our culture, in our day, with masculinized females and feminized men. That's already here.
Mm-hmm. So if I understand you correctly, then they might view the activism that led to where we are today as being the magic in operation, that it worked.
And in fact, you take that a step further. Today, we are developing technologies that would result in the actual changing of the human body physically. I mean, sex change operations have been around for many decades. They're now called sex reassignment surgery. Mm-hmm. But that's another aspect of this. We're so quickly getting to a point where you'd be able to walk into a doctor's office and say, hey, I want this and I don't want that, and I just make up your own thing. Again, why go from male to female or female to male? Why not just invent something brand new and have it done to you? That's like right around the corner if it's not here already.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I will say some of the procedures, they're quite successful in presenting someone as female. Again, if I look at the person I mentioned earlier, Blair White, looks very female, sounds very female. The first time I saw Blair White, I thought that was a biological female. So, I mean, the science is getting very good at it.
Yes, and they can produce fully functioning organs as well. I mean, maybe not to the point where males can get pregnant, but, you know, there's other organs that will function quite well. So if you don't mind, I wanted to touch upon that statement by George Stravosky and James Hughes.
Sure, go ahead.
From their paper, Postgenderism Beyond the Gender Binary. This is what they write. Efforts to treat female depression and male aggression, autism, and ADD would give us ways to make the brain more androgynous. Francis Fukuyama lamented these trends, the masculizing of depressive women's moods by antidepressants and the feminizing of ADD boys with stimulant medications in his book, Our Post-Human Future, asserting that they were the result of a pressure to conform to an androgynous median personality in American society. And when they were asked for examples of chemicals employed towards such ends, Hughes stated, quote, pseudoestrogens and endocrine disruptors, especially phthalates from plastics. So let me just unpack this a little bit. First of all, note that they say that it would give us ways to make the brain more androgynous. So this is absolutely purposeful. And the tactic, okay, so how many of our young children today, again, are on hardcore pharmaceuticals because of the fact that, for example, boys tend to be hyper. So you can't have a hyper boy in the classroom. Teachers used to be able to handle that until modern days. I don't know what happened all of a sudden, but you have to put them on hardcore pharmaceuticals to make them calm down. But this is creating pseudoestrogens in their bodies. And conversely, for women, they're essentially receiving forms of testosterone. And so what you have is, let's say a young lady, a girl, her body is designed to construct the body of a woman with the musculature of a woman and the skeletal system of a woman and the mind of a woman, yes, the emotions of a woman, everything that goes with, but her system is being flooded with testosterone. And so what does it do? The body is literally biologically confused. And the same thing with boys being flooded with estrogen or pseudoestrogen. What does it do? And this is why today you end up with so many kids who are basically blob-like. I mean, it's not just the way that they dress or do their hair. It's that you look at their bodies and it's like a blob. You can't really tell what it is because their bodies are biologically confused. They don't know what to do with this building material that doesn't belong there.
Mm-hmm. So how should we respond to this sort of activism?
Well, that's one of the difficult aspects of it, because the minute you do, you're shut down. So that alone is incredibly challenging. I'm constantly hearing from politicians, we have to have a national conversation on this and that and the other. No, we don't have those conversations. We're lectured to, and we're told to be quiet if we disagree. So frankly, besides getting out and preaching the gospel, I have no idea, because that's the concept, is that this is being done on purpose. It's being done on every conceivable level you could even imagine, and probably some you can't imagine. And if you have something to say that even questions it, that's it. You're done for.
True. We have a cancel culture that is out to get anybody who steps out of line with the leftist orthodoxy. That's for sure.
And let me just give you an example really quick about the issue with psychiatry and psychology, because it used to be that in the literature, issues such as body dysmorphia were rightly categorized as disorders that needed to be treated. Today, that's gone from that literature. Now it's celebrated. And I'll give you a perfect example in the form of Dr. Phil McGraw, the famous Dr. Phil. So this actually happened. He had a woman on his show who had 20/20 vision, okay? But she self-identified as blind. So she got some advice that she could damage her eyesight by doing a certain thing I don't want to mention. And now she's legally blind. And he was incensed. These people who advised you, they're unethical, and you had perfect vision, and now you blinded. This is horrible, terrible. Why? Well, because she took a perfectly functioning organ and she destroyed it. But then the next day, metaphorically speaking, he'll have a person on who wants to transition, who took one of their perfectly functioning organs and destroyed it, and he thinks they should be celebrated. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's 100% hypocrisy.
Yeah.
And it's like he doesn't see it. And he's supposed to be someone who's trained in pathology and all kinds of disorders, but he celebrates the one and he condemns the other.
I think one of the things that is making this issue so such a hot topic is that leftist political activists have latched onto it. This is I think it's an issue of primarily mental health, because gender dysphoria creates depression and anxiety and a lot of other issues. And so I think it's an issue that was better kept private between the person and their family, their pastor, their physicians, etc. But the left has grabbed it and used it as a political weapon. And I mean, we can just see how the left has treated, for example, members of the African American community who have left the Democrat plantation and come out as vocal conservatives and are voting Republican now. The left trashes them, calls them every sort of racist smear they can find. And it's only a matter of time before they do the same thing to those who are in the transgender community. Do you agree?
Absolutely. And see, ultimately, everything breaks down eventually to spiritual warfare in one form or another. So, for instance, if you're looking around our culture today and thinking, what happened? This would have been utterly unthinkable even a couple of years ago if somebody would proposed it. You would have just called them insane. So the insanity of yesterday is the sanity of today. And any way to disrupt God's creation is going to be supported. And what you see is that when God talks about people being blinded, spiritually blinded, it's shocking to see it right before your eyes. When, like my wife and I, sometimes we try to reason through an issue that we hear about, and we think there's no reasoning. It is unreasonable on a level that we can reason through it. We can make sense of it, but the actions are so contradictory. But then what does it matter to contradict yourself if you determine reality by your own emotions anyway?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So anything, so the family is essentially the one of the strongholds, right? Because essentially family is a micro government existing within a macro government, and the government can't really allow that. They can't allow that you're going to do in your home as you please. So for instance, now children can get on hardcore pharmaceuticals, as we noted, without a parent's consent. That is what is being put out there. That should be perfectly acceptable. Again, they're not allowed to drive, they're not allowed to drink, they're not allowed to vote, but getting prescriptions to hardcore pharmaceuticals that will change them for a lifetime, they should be able to do that without a parent's consent.
Yeah, that's clearly insane. It's just insane. Now, one of the things you mentioned the family, and I think this is an important point as well, is that especially conservative Christian families in the past, and perhaps even recently, when a family member has come out struggling with homosexuality or gender dysphoria, whatever it happens to be, they find themselves ostracized, cut off from the family. And I think that is a huge, huge mistake. All that does is it pushes somebody into the arms of the leftist community, into the hands of people who don't really have their best interests at heart and would perhaps give them bad advice, encourage them in a direction that they will later regret having gone in, like these detransitioners. That's what I'm hearing consistently from them. And I think families need to love their family members who are struggling or have come to them with this or come out, love them, and be the salt and light, not ostracize them. Do you think that is something that? Do you think I'm correct? And if so, is there some way we can help families? Is there some sort of a training program or something that we can provide for families to help them negotiate these issues and mitigate the damage that it can do to the family unit?
Well, the minute you began that initial sentence, I wrote a note to myself so I would remember to speak of empathy, because I definitely wanted to make that point. To me, there's a huge world of a difference between an individual who is struggling with these kind of issues versus the sociopolitical movement that is militant and authoritative. That's completely different issues. So my heart absolutely shatters in a million pieces for anybody who looks in the mirror and looks at their bodies and they just are struggling with what they're seeing and who they think they are. And that kind of confusion is just heartbreaking to me, that would happen to somebody. And that, moreover, they would be taken advantage of now, and they would be pushed into making these drastic decisions. And so that is part of it, is the heartbreak that a person made in God's image, and who incidentally might actually be suffering from ultimate effects of the fall, which would be genetic problems, so that there might be something mental or biological about them that would make it difficult for them to comfortably fit in either gender. But that then they would be told that it's incumbent upon them to become an activist, right? To demand that essentially reality be changed to match them. But that would still not solve anything, because we know from statistics that even post-surgery, post-pharmaceuticals, when everything's done that the person thought they needed done, suicide rate is absolutely through the roof, and then through the roof above that roof. It's astonishing. So for the person, the individual, we have to be absolutely heartbroken, and they need a tremendous amount of love, prayer, and grace. The movement, that's a whole other issue. But in terms of the family, well, that's part of the problem itself. What do you mean by family anymore? A mom who's been married twice and now got tired of getting married and divorced, so is just not attached to anybody, and a dad who sees the kids once a month and calls that parenting, and lovers coming in and out of their lives, and children learning to not get emotionally attached to people because the lover du jour will just be gone the next day and another one will come and take their place. It's like I'm telling you, it's overwhelming how multifaceted these problems are and how they kind of just combine into a cluster bomb, like a perfect storm. Mm-hmm. And so ultimately, the ultimate reality is that in the beginning, God created them male and female, and he meant for them to come together and stay together to build a stable, safe, loving environment wherein then children would be born and raised, and then they would leave their mother and father and be attached to their spouses, and it would all perpetuate that way. That's the model. That's the ultimate model. And even people who argue against the traditional family have to admit, and often do, that that is the best working model, the safest and the healthiest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And, you know, there's legislation right now being proposed that would take children away from parents who forbid them the opportunity to enter into these transition programs and change their bodies. It's really getting crazy out there. Ken, I really appreciate you being on the program. Why don't you tell listeners how they can connect with you and get your books?
Sure, and thank you. It's been a pleasure, and wow, it is such a difficult and complicated issue that I'm glad you would be bold enough to address it. My site is truefreethinker.com, all one word, True Free Thinker, and I made it user-friendly, so everything will be there for you.
Okay, and for listeners, to make it even easier for you, if you're listening at the kcrradio.com website, go to the Expedition Truth page. Down at the bottom there, you'll see a link for Ken Ami's page on there. And there are links to his social media and his website there to make it simple for you. If you're listening on YouTube, if you look in the description right underneath this video, you'll find links to Ken's website where you can get his books, etc. Ken is a fascinating individual. And he's not afraid of difficult topics, but I think he deals with them with sincere compassion. And I think that's something that I could learn from him. I'm pretty good at giving reasons for my faith, but sometimes I fail in doing it with love. And that's something that Ken is able to do very well. And I admire that in him. Ken, do you have any final words for our listeners tonight before we go?
No, just thank you for your kind words, and all praise is due to Jesus, because of obviously I sinned and he saved. There's my testimony.
Yeah, I think that's ditto for me. Anything good in me is purely from him.
Yes, indeed.
So thanks for being on, Ken, and thank you all for listening. That's the end of tonight's expedition. God bless. See you next week.
Been listening to Expedition Truth, hosted by Jack Ashcraft. It's time to believe in the unbelievable. Live every Thursday night, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. For more information on Jack Ashcraft, the show, as well as his guests, please visit his website at www.paleoorthodoxy.com. Expedition Truth. Intelligent talk for the discerning mind. Why? Because the truth never fears questions.
This is KCOR Las Vegas, home of the Digital Radio Network, broadcasting from a shack just south of Area 51. Wait, that doesn't exist. This is the KCOR